What works? What doesn't? These are key questions that you want to ask when you're developing your innovation proposal. We're going to provide a few key ideas and point to some successful strategies that will help you be successful in your innovation planning proposal. Welcome. I'm Dr. Dwayne Hrapnick, and my colleague is.
Dr. Talissa Thibodeau?
We want to talk to you about innovation planning, developing an innovation proposal, an innovation plan, your implementation strategy, all these key ideas that will enable you to make a significant difference in your learning environment. So if you want to enhance learning and use technology to enhance learning, you've got to come up with some sort of a plan. Well, what works? What doesn't? We have some key ideas that we want to share with you. One of the first things that we want to address is that your innovation plan has to be big enough that it's going to make a difference, not just in your classroom, but potentially in your school. Because if you're going to do something that is going to change your learners' lives in your classroom, well, guess what? You'll want them to be able to do that outside of your classroom as well. So that plan has to be big enough that it can extend beyond your classroom. But it also has to be small enough and controllable enough that you can pilot it in your learning environment. So that's one of the first things that we encourage you to consider. Before we go on to some of the other ideas, I want Dr. Thibodeau to jump in here and provide a couple of key tips that she has as well.
So, in innovation planning, it's so important to start small, as you said, but still see that bigger picture. I say this because a lot of times folks will want to change the world with this one idea or change the climate of the entire school. But you really have to test and retest your ideas and really take a look at some of the literature around it and see what's happened in the past, so that you can better inform yourself and make some key decisions about your innovation planning. And truth be told, you want to give yourself enough time, because I find that folks will want to jump right in and put everything into place all at once. And you really have to give yourself sort of a set up an outline, if you will, to kind of think about, one step at a time. How can I do this? What are some of the things that will help me and enable me to be successful? And what are some of the tripping blocks along the way? It gives you an opportunity to reflect, consider, and then build out your plan so that you can be successful. But again, that takes time and planning and starting a bit on a smaller scale to really, test and trial and error and test out your ideas.
I think the time perspective is something that we often overlook, and
Mhm.
we might have gone to a conference or talked to somebody who was at a conference and they saw some latest idea, and you just want to barge on in and implement that without really thinking it through.
Mhm.
Um, Even though a lot of innovation ideas seem to be new, quite often they're not. They're often reworked older ideas that might be just a little bit more unique because technology enables you to do something different and or more effectively. So quite often it's important to take enough time to take a look at the literature that's out there and to see what really is happening, right? You can go to a conference and get all hyped up about something, but then, if you don't really think it through and take a look at your environment, you can run into trouble. Another issue that comes up, and this is something that leads to a fair amount of failure with innovation planning, and that is focusing on the technology first. So you want to focus on learning. The best technology is a technology that disappears. It isn't there, and it enhances the learning environment. And over the years that I've been doing this for a few decades now, where I see failure in innovation planning is that people got or get hung up on a particular piece of software, a particular technology, or a particular device. We have to get the device in their hands. And once we have the device in their hands, all problems are solved. Well, unless you focus on what you're going to use that device for in terms of creation,
Mhm.
exploration, discovery, communication, collaboration, if you don't do that, just putting a device in a learner's hand might have an impact of getting them excited, but it can very quickly fall into the category of $1,000 pencil in the sense that now you've got this digital device that instead of a paper-based worksheet, well, you use it for a online worksheet. The
Yeah.
problem is the worksheet's the problem. You need to look at learning differently. So you need to focus on the learning first before you look at the technology. And I know you'd like to talk about the cart before the horse, Dr. Thibodeau, so I'll let you jump in on this one too.
I do. When I think about learning, I think about that should really be when we set up our learning outcomes, that should really define our pathway and what we're looking to do. And the technology should really be, supportive of that. But if we actually do it the other way around and we put the cart before the horse, we're going to essentially fall into that trap of what districts and what administrators tend to think of. Let's deploy these devices, let's focus on the software, let's focus on the hardware. And sometimes we get trapped in that, got to deploy these devices, and we're not actually thinking about the learning. And when the focus is over there on the devices and not necessarily on the learning, this is where that cart comes before the horse. And I would say that the horse is going to trip over the cart. And we're not going to go anywhere. So, and that just brings me to, just something as simple as defining how important those learning outcomes really are, and then using the tech to support it, so much so that it fades in the learning environment, almost as if no one really knows it's there, but it is there. And it's used as that support mechanism. So that's one big piece I don't want folks to forget as they're participating in building out their innovation plan, and presenting their proposals.
And one more little tidbit I want to add with the cart and horse, and this is an idea from Seymour Papert.
Mhm.
He makes the argument in his work and in a couple of his books that taking technology and bolting it onto the traditional classroom is the same as bolting a jet engine onto the horse cart. Not a good idea. The horse isn't going to like it. It's going to scare. The horse is going to destroy the cart, because the problem is that if you've got a culture that is mired in the 20th century, well, you've got to make some changes to that culture, to that learning culture, and that's where the focus on the learning has to be. You've got to focus on the learning first. So some of the ideas that are can work very, very well for innovation planning are things like computational thinking, programming, building apps, things like that. And the wonderful online, mobile, or blended learning. Remember, it's the learning that you're putting online. It's the learning that you are setting up in a blend. It's a learning that you are facilitating that happens all the time and everywhere within a mobile context. It's the learning first.
Mhm.
Um, Maker spaces, robotics, e-portfolios, not assessment portfolios, learning portfolios, or what we
Mhm.
like to refer to as e-portfolios. So these are some starting points for innovation plans that can work very, very well because they focus on the learning first. But there are some things that you have to be careful about. So what are some of the things that you think that people would want to avoid, Dr. Thibodeau?
Gosh, I have a couple thoughts in mind. One, sometimes I find in innovation planning, folks tend to focus very directly, almost laser focus into a particular app, and that the app is going to, solve the learning challenges of their students. Or they'll go down the pathway of, in blended learning, I'm putting my students onto the computer, and this computer assisted instruction idea where, get on there, the technology is going to solve all the problems, and the technology is going to build a learning path. That's not personalized learning, as we know. So that's one major thing I think of. Another thing I think about too, and this might stray a little bit away, and you can bring us back here in a second, is, you know, if we build out media pitches, and we build out videos of our ideas before we have an idea in place, we could essentially be focusing on that video and that media as opposed to the actual proposal or idea that we need to develop before we get to that point. So that to me was something I wanted to say a little bit earlier, while still addressing your question. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, we do run into difficulties if we try to build out a pitch for what we're doing before we really are clear on what we need to do. And as we have seen over the last several years, and I've been doing this a while, it can take some time. We're talking weeks, months even, for an idea to really coalesce and to really recognize what do you really need to do in your environment. I want to give you one quick example. This is not uncommon in the DLL program. Students will identify, well, they want to actually do a one-to-one initiative, or they have a one-to-one initiative. This is actually quite common. They have a one-to-one initiative, so everybody has devices, but nobody's using the devices. Nobody brings them to class. Nothing's really happening. And so students will take a look at, well, how do I actually get people to implement a one-to-one effectively? What do we really need to do? Well, the challenge that these students quickly find out is that just because you have a device doesn't mean that people will use them. You have to change the learning environment and change the culture, and you have to move away from handing out paper in every class or in your staff meetings to going to a digital environment. And so quite often, a lot of these people who are mired in a failed one-to-one initiative, the reason it doesn't work is that everybody is still doing what they've traditionally done. They work with the paper. You have to make a shift, and you have to move the
Mhm.
thinking and the behaviors to move them away from that traditional paper-based thinking of learning, right? The worksheet, the meeting minutes, right? And it has to happen at the administrative level, and it has to happen at the classroom level. So quite often, a failed one-to-one initiative is not necessarily a failure with the technology, but it's a failure to move the school, the learning environment, into the 21st century, and to fully take advantage of all the digital resources and tools. But that is a learning shift. That's an environmental shift. That is something that has to happen before you can take advantage of the technology. So that happens quite a bit. So when we look at these ideas, another problem that we have, and we're educators, so we solve all our problems by educating, by informing, and we believe, well, here's a solution. We're going to deploy X, Y, and Z. We're going to deploy this Chromebook cart initiative or Chromebooks for all, and then all we need to do is run professional development at the beginning of the year for all the teachers, and then our problem is solved. Yeah, the research is clear. It doesn't work because in order for professional learning to be effective, you have to do it over an extended period of time. You have to create the right type of a context. You have to have ongoing support. The people who lead the professional learning have to actually have experience in really doing it. And it has to happen within the context of the classroom, a real world or authentic opportunity. So a lot of these innovation plans and proposals can be realized and become more effective if you take enough time. If you take a look at the fact that it's not a matter of training the teacher, PD isn't going to solve the problem, but it's really focusing on the learning first and understanding how you want to use technology to enhance the learning, to enhance communication, to enhance collaboration, to enhance creativity. You know, we live in the most amazing time to be a learner. Technology is an amazing tool if we use it to do those amazing things. If we simply use technology as $1,000 pencil to fill out a digital worksheet, then we're wasting a lot of resources and we're wasting the potential for our learners. And we don't want to go down that path. So hopefully we've given you some ideas of what will work and what won't work, and caution you to not get caught up on the technology. It's always got to be about the learning first.